Hey, welcome back to Miss Maddie's Studio. I'm Maddie, and today is the fourth chapter read from my book, The Things That Haunt Me, and today's chapter is called Don't Lose Your Head. Today's art will be an illustration of some monster fruit done all in ink. Most of the previous chapters I've read were when I was a child in the house I grew up in. Today's chapter happened when I was 17, had been kicked out of my parents' home, and now lived with an abusive jerk in a house with a lot of his family. Now that you know that, let's get the lights and start the spooky story time. I had been living in this home with this terrible man for months and now was pregnant. I was trying to finish my senior year of high school, but he made that impossible. He accused me of having boyfriends at school and cheating on him all day long. If I managed to sneak out of the house to catch the bus in the morning, he was blowing up my phone all day. One time he messaged me 144 times in a single 90-minute class, all because I wouldn't text him in chorus class. And I had nowhere else to go. I was stuck. He finally wore me down enough about school that I had just stopped going. It was easier than trying to convince him that he was wrong. He didn't work but managed to be gone all day. Even though he wanted me home, apparently he didn't need to be home. I tried to entertain myself, but the only thing I had to do was watch TV. He was weird about me drawing or doing art. There were times he burned my sketchbooks because it was the best way to mess with me. It discouraged me greatly, and I stopped creating for a long time because of it. What was the point if he was going to destroy it? This had become my typical day. We slept in through the morning, then he would get high and leave for a few hours to the whole day, either fishing or who knows what. Then we would eat dinner and go to bed. I don't remember a lot of that time. There was so much fighting. I was just trying to survive and barely had the spoons to deal with the emotional craziness that was always happening. Once I became pregnant, things just got worse and worse. Another thing that changed with pregnancy was that I needed to sleep all the time. The room we shared wasn't a bedroom. I heard it called a Florida room, but it was just like a porched area. The walls were lined with plastic windows, 3 of them stacked on each other, and then probably 6 columns across the long wall and 2 columns and a door on either side of the small walls. One door led out to a rundown pool that had never been taken care of. The other door led out to the backyard. We had our mattress on the ground in the corner of the room closest to the pool, and some dressers that lined the outside and inside walls. They had a few animal tanks on them, a large boa constrictor and a large fish tank that had big Oscar cichlids inside, one black and one albino. It was a nice room, but I didn't like hanging out in there very much. Even though the windows had sheets covering them, I always felt like I was being watched in that room. I only saw something in that room once, or, well, outside the room, I guess. It was late afternoon, and I was coming back from yet another trip to the bathroom. I was tired and needed to lay down, but as I entered the room, something caught my eye. Someone was looking in through the window. It was along the short wall that led to the backyard right next to the door. It was locked, but it was just a shitty screen door, so if someone really wanted to, they could get in. I hesitantly walked closer to see better who was standing in the yard. It was a middle-aged woman. She looked Latina, but was oddly pale. She had long black hair that was tied up in a high ponytail. She was wearing a couple layered tank tops and a really small black miniskirt with some chunky bracelets and a long necklace. I honestly thought that she was a friend of someone in the house. Even though I was standing in front of her, she acted like she couldn't see me. Then she started going from window to window, looking inside for a few minutes and then on to the next. She went to every window and then back twice before I finally decided to confront her. I waved my hand in front of her face and said, "Hello, are you lost or something? Why are you looking through my windows?" She finally looked at me, but her eyes looked wrong. They were glossy and filmed over like a dead person's eyes, milky, sunken back into the socket, and filled with sadness and desperation. She tried to speak, but when she opened her mouth, a horrible, rasping breath was all that came out. She grabbed at her throat and looked at me in frustration and confusion. She looked so scared and confused, so I thought maybe she was hurt. I ran outside to see if I could do something more to help, but when I went into the backyard, she was gone. I quickly looked around, seeing if she had run off or something, and then shrugged and went back inside. I jumped at a bang from the window. It was the woman, her face and hands pressed to the glass, seeming to beg me for help. Her mouth was feverishly moving, but no noise was coming out. Tears were running down her cheeks and splashed on the window. There was blood mixed in it. She started banging her fists against the window in a feral and desperate attempt. That was when it all clicked. She must be a ghost. A poor woman trapped somewhere between this life and the next. My heart ached for her as I realized that she didn't know what was going on. I decided I was going to help her out, or at least try. I couldn't leave her banging and clawing at the glass. I got a little closer and told her that I thought she was dead and that I was sorry. She froze and looked at me like I had sprouted another head. She started shaking her head no and hugged herself around her shoulders. She shook and cried for a moment, and I thought that maybe she was coming to terms with it. It had to be hard, 1 minute being alive and the next not, but still being trapped in this weird in-between place where most can't see you or interact with you, and you can't interact with the world, seeking answers but not being able to get them. She looked down, and it suddenly seemed like she was in shadow. She let out a loud scream to the sky that made me scramble away from the window. Wasn't she mute a moment ago? She then started bashing her head against the window, over and over, bam, bam, bam. After what felt like forever, she stopped and stared at me as blood ran down her face. She had a smile on her face, smeared with that blood. She looked absolutely insane. I didn't even understand how that was happening. They weren't strong windows. She wouldn't have been able to cause that much damage to herself on these windows. But that logical kind of thinking wasn't going through my head at the time. I watched in horror as she then grabbed fistfuls of hair on both sides of her head. She then started pulling and twisting her head like she was angrily trying to open a pickle jar. She got rougher and rougher as she wrenched her head back and forth. It twisted more and more until the skin started to tear and bleed. I watched as it started to rip more and more, exposing all of the visceral in her neck. Blood started to gush out of the wound as her neck ripped in two. She held her severed head above her neck stump and made a horrible laughing noise. It was gurgled and broken through the blood. Her neck wound was spurting, and it was flowing down her body like a waterfall. She started trying to speak. I couldn't understand it at all. Between the gurgling through the blood and her not being able to speak properly before that. But it was more than that. I think she was speaking in Spanish. But again, I couldn't make out what she was trying to say. I was frozen, staring at her in complete shock. She became paler and more translucent as she stood there, still trying to talk or yell at me. Eventually, she faded away, and I was left there, standing, trying to make sense of the craziness of all of what just happened. I ran around the yard, checking to see if I could make sense of anything more, seeing if I could find a trail of blood even. She seemed so real, even with her disappearing in front of my eyes. I still, all this time, couldn't make sense of the fact that ghosts could be there 1 second, looking as real as you and me, and then a second later, gone. Like they had never been there to begin with, and you're left looking crazy, like you had been interacting with something that had never been there. I don't know what happened to that poor woman, but there was no evidence of her. I hope she moved on, but who knows? If you're ripping off your own head, you probably have more issues to work out, and issues to work out means that your spirit usually stays trapped here. Okay, that was Don't Lose Your Head, a chapter from my book, The Things That Haunt Me. Next week is a special Halloween video with the scariest of my stories, a chapter that's called That's Not a Fox. I will warn you that that story has mention of some gore and is a pretty intense story. I will also be doing my first real fan art, which will be an illustration of Jack and Sally from Nightmare Before Christmas, which is one of my favorite movies, especially during the spooky season. I hope that you have been enjoying this spooky story time so far and come back for the scariest story next week. Now let's talk about the artwork a little bit, because we've got a couple more minutes now. Today's artwork is based off of a random sketch I did in my current sketchbook that was a lemon that had a bunch of eyes on it. I wanted to make my own version of the classic bowl of fruit still life paintings, but with my own monster twist. I also wanted to challenge myself by doing this illustration with only pen. I'm pretty happy with how this piece came out. I messed up a little bit of the hatching on the sides of the bowl, but overall I like it. I would love to try to do this again as a full-colored painting with some slight changes. I would make the bowl smaller and wider so I could show more fruit, and I would try to add some more variety to the fruit and their monster bits. Recently, I drew another monster fruit that had some spider elements, and now I wish I had thought of it for this illustration. If it was in color, I would have been able to make the insides of their mouths look like the fruit, which is what I wanted to do, but that's kind of hard to do with just black ink. I really enjoyed doing all of the hatching work on this illustration. As you can see, I did hatching really everywhere. I was using it to make the table have some texture to it. I used it in the background to try and make it a little darker, just, distinguish it from the foreground a little bit. I tried to make a braided rope for the curtain that it was holding it back so you could see the clock. I don't really know why I put a clock in there to begin with, because it didn't really need it, but I couldn't figure out what to put on the wall itself, and I didn't really want to draw like a painting, you know what I mean? So I'm going in now and I'm cleaning up some of the lines on the edge, really making things thicker in places so they really, really stand out, because it's a lot of, it's all the same color. It's either black or white, Now I'm adding just a little bit of crown molding in one of those patterns that you used to see. You don't really see it anymore much in crown moldings, but I really wanted to add some. I wish I had planned out the design more before I actually drew it, but that's okay. Alright, well that is it for this week's video. If you want to support me more, I have a Patreon, TeePublic, and a website. All the links for that are in my bio on my page. And please like, subscribe, and comment for the algorithm. It really does help. And I hope to see you next time for my special Halloween video. Happy Halloween to everyone out there, and bye!